Right now, this is Ticker News Insight.
Hello and welcome back to Ticker News Insight, and it's been a big year for business this year with Ticker's Elevate program celebrating women throughout business. Thanks to the team at Lift Angels. For now, we will be gathering some insights from the winning groups of Lift Women's Founders Grant Challenge, starting with Sarah Qian. She's a chemical engineer turned management consultant, now the founder of Compassion Creamery, a startup crafting the world's first oat cream cheese. Check it out.
Yeah, so I'm actually originally from New Zealand and Kiwi, and back home I ate, drank and consumed a lot of dairy. And it wasn't until I actually moved to Sydney where I realised that I needed to cut it out for health reasons. And eventually over a few years became vegan, and yeah, that was almost 8 years ago. So it was during that time that I realised that yeah, just more and more people were obsessed about this thing called oat milk. And in my head, vegan cheese always has had a really bad reputation. So I thought, was there a way to sort of combine the two together? And so that's sort of how it started.
Very cool. So what's different about oat cream cheese compared to other vegan cheeses that are available? I know for one, my partner's very picky about the vegan cheese that I have to choose, but take us through what's different.
Yeah, so we actually make our oat milk from scratch, and then we ferment and curdle it. So it's actually following a process quite similar to how dairy cheese is made. So it doesn't have any coconut oils or starches, emulsifiers, gums, all of that stuff. So
nice, all the good stuff. So what was the motivation in spending so much time, I guess, creating that formulation and making sure those processes were, in place? And I suppose that your background would have helped with that as well?
Yeah, for sure. So my background's in chemical engineering. So essentially what that is turning raw materials into final products and then figuring out all of the steps in between. So yeah, and in terms of this process, it was figuring out how to turn oats into something that's a liquid and oat milk, and then turning that into something that's solid and oat cheese. So
it's so cool. It just makes so much sense when you break it down like that. And of course, I'm sure you enjoyed the process. But let's talk what the brand Compassion stands for. Take us through a little bit about the ethos behind what you guys are doing.
So for a lot of my friends who are vegan, they see it and they're like, oh my gosh, of course, compassion for the animals, for the environment, in terms of sustainability. But for me, it was also about this idea of self-compassion. I had worked in the corporate world for a couple of years, got really burnt out, and throughout COVID, I think it was a time for all of us for a lot of introspective thinking.
Yes, very much so,
yeah. And so it ended up just, this word compassion just kept on popping up in my life, and I was like, God, is there, some sort of sign or something for me to actually work towards something that was a bit more, I guess, morally and ethically aligned. So,
I love that, of course. And consumers are expecting that more and more as time goes on, businesses being ethically and, of course, sustainably conscious as well. Where are you and the team at now? And I guess if you could take us through a little bit about what the future holds for you and the team, and maybe where we can get our hands on some of the product, give it a taste test, enjoy it.
Yeah, for sure. So at the moment, we've finalised the R&D. We've been setting up and commissioning a pilot plant. That has been absolute chaos, but scale-ups always are, as I've been told by every single process engineer that I've come across. Right. So yeah, hopefully we'll be able to scale up into retail soon. Most of the time right now, we're distributing to food service and corporate within Sydney/Melbourne. So if anyone does want to reach out to me via Instagram or whatever, that's totally fine.
And now we have some wonderful ideas coming to us from Kylie, Wallace and Jessica Bowman. They joined me to talk about their group and how they are helping people identify true charity when making donations. No worries at all. Kylie, I'll start with you. How can I go about finding a high-performing charity to give to that perhaps I can trust? Take us through a bit about what you've seen.
Yeah, so it is actually really hard, especially when you're thinking about giving away large gifts. So what we're really trying to do is help make giving easier, especially being able to find those high-performing giving opportunities. So we get to know about people's passions and their values and their life experiences, and we find and vet high-performing charities for people to be able to consider supporting. And we look at over 50 different indicators of a high-performing charity, so people can really know that their money is going to fantastic organizations who are going to spend their money really well. So that's really what we're about.
Yeah, very cool. So Jess, how do you know if a charity you're giving to is actually perhaps wasting the money on anything from admin through to marketing, or I don't know if that's a waste or not, but what are you seeing out there?
So the way that we look at charities, and our number one criteria for a good charity, is that they've got a great strategic direction, they've got a real mission, and they're actually delivering on that. And so there are a number of things to ascertain whether or not a charity is delivering on their mission. So the first thing we look at is their financial records to see that money is actually being spent as they described. The second thing we look at is their governance. So who's on the board and who's on the executive team? What are their skills, background, experience? What do they want to get out of this experience of working with charity? And then the last thing that we look at is their social impact record. So can they clearly describe and document the kind of impact that they're actually having on their beneficiaries' lives?
Just continuing on from that, Jess, how do I know which charity needs my money the most? There's often so many people vying for those precious dollars and those donations as well, but how do you work out which ones, perhaps need it more than others?
Well, I think particularly over the last few years, there have been a lot of really intense crises, and all of these charities have called for our donations, and it has been really quite overwhelming, the number of issues that there have been out there, and these organisations raising money for these issues. But what we find is when there is a crisis, there's a huge influx of funds, but that money isn't able to be spent within the crisis period, and it's often spent over a much longer period of time. So instead of responding to calls for money or calls to action in the midst of a crisis, we always recommend that people actually just follow their own gut instincts and their own heart as to the cause that they are mostly connected to, because they'll find over their lifetime or over the next 10 years, that cause will be in a state of crisis. But if they've been supporting them prior to that state of crisis, then that cause will be much better equipped to respond in that moment.
Following on from that, we had another wonderful chat with Dr. Ruwangi Fernando and Dr. Morley Muse, who are looking to get more women into STEM-skilled workforces.
Thanks for having us.
First up, I want to congratulate both of you. You've obviously taken away the Lift Women Founders Award. Take us through a little bit how it feels to be selected.
Yeah. So we are very pleased to have winning that award. Of course, there were other two categories won by very profound women. And particularly for us, we started iSTEM Co as a journey in earlier this year. So we had great successes to celebrate, and Lift Women was definitely one of the major ones too.
Of course,
yes.
Of course. And you've both appeared on the Elevate program we offer here on Ticker, which is celebrating women in business. So it's exciting to see you, and I appreciate the time to speak with you. But I wanted to talk a little bit about perhaps what you've noticed in relation to the struggles and all of those skills shortages that we're starting to see, and I guess continuing to see.
It's interesting you mentioned that because as we know, I think it was in September in Canberra, we had the Jobs and Skills Summit.
Yes.
And then there was a lot of emphasis about skill shortages, especially in STEM. But what's interesting to note is that, I gave these statistics during the last Elevate interview that 56% of university qualified females in STEM are Australian women born overseas. So these are not international students, these are not temporary residents, these are Australian women, people who have, called Australia home. But unfortunately, they experience over 4 times higher unemployment rates. The number actually is 4.2.
Right.
Yes, in a country where we are saying that we need, these skills.
Yeah.
And in STEM, there are only 29% of women in the entire STEM workforce. So they are already, so I think it's not a lack of skill shortage, it's a lack of being open-minded to receive the already qualified women that we have right here on ground to be absorbed into these industries. And that's what iSTEM is doing.
Well, and to you guys, and of course what you're working on as well. Take us through a little bit about how iSTEM Co is looking to solve those issues and actually bring the talent to the top.
Perhaps, Ruwangi, you want to tell them
Yeah.
about our Tech Recruit platform, and I'll tell them what we are currently doing with Southeast Water.
Yeah, sure. So we, as an iSTEM Co, we focus on talent sourcing, consulting, and also research, which is down in the pipeline. Currently, the major issue, as we primarily explained, is the skill shortage, and then already the talent is here, and why there is this problem. So it's to bridge this gap. It's just that women are saying they're applying and not getting opportunities. STEM employers are needing talent, and there is obviously a gap. And then there's a supply and both the demand, but there is no equilibrium over here. So in order to solving that particular problem, we thought it's the best approach to go with a tech recruitment platform, which also using technology to avoid some of the bias that we find in recruitment, because that is one of the key things. Bias we all do have, but when they are being implicit in this kind of scenario, it really becomes challenging in order to take the work forward. So in the tech recruitment platform, it allows jobs to be posted, women's to be applied, but at the same time, we remove all the biased elements in terms of their names, which sounds not Western names, which brings that attention. Their previous qualification comes from different countries, their ages, and all of that. So you only assess an individual for who they are, for their talent and their experience. So when you come to that point and really make a judgment, it's a judgment that you can, and then that moves to the next phase of interview. That is, we have standardized. So in a standardized interview process, again, all the types of biasnesses and then individual kind of marginalizations are being removed. So that comes to the next stage.
Very clever, very clever.
The other interesting bit about our platform is that we've got a job benchmark. As an employer, we've got certain boxes that you have to tick before you post your job to ensure that it attracts women from all backgrounds.
Absolutely. It sounds like an incredible platform.
Yes, it is.
Unfortunately, that's all the time I've got for you, but I want to thank you both for joining us on the program, highlighting everything you're up to. I think it's an incredibly noble cause, and it sounds like it's taking off. So thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having us.